Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We now move on to the most important part of macroeconomics, which is government policy in changing the economy. Let's put that heading up. Government policies. Policies, because there are many choices that the government have, including laissez-faire, which is to let the national economy correct itself. This is something that I think we've touched on in previous episodes. Government policies in improving the national economy. Now, as we've already looked in previous episodes, governments depend on the fact that the national economy works and is serving the nation. If it is not, the population is likely to show its displeasure. It can do things like industrial action, like general strikes. It can call elections, which means that the other party that's offering better welfare or welfare prospects will be able to take over. And in some countries, when it gets very extreme, right, there can be threats of revolution and mass revolt and general anarchy if people don't feel that they are able to get that the national economy is not working for them, that their basic needs, however they interpret it, are not being met. Now, the main problems can fall under the following list, right, as we've had in previous episodes. One problem is that that the prices are going up too quickly. Right, that's inflation. The money that they saved isn't worth what it was. In this day and age, there's another problem that's existing, which is deflation, which is a very unusual problem, which means that people haven't got anywhere where they can. People want to invest their money, but wherever they're going to invest it, they feel that it might be worth less by the time they take it out. Right? They won't be, that they're not going to be able to earn interest on the money, which means that they haven't got the motivation to invest. As we've said in previous episodes, the national economy depends not just on demand from consumers, but also demand from investors. That investors can find products which they can actually, which they can invest in, and as a result, they can expect to make a reasonable profit. If we have deflation, that seems to be less likely to happen, and it will undermine the confidence of the investor. We don't want that. So let's go back and quickly just recap what are the main problems. One of them is inflation, the fear of inflation, right? Or conversely, the fear of deflation. What is the ideal is a modest rate of inflation is good, something like 1 or 2%, but certainly not 10%, and certainly nothing worse than that, or the hyperinflation that's been characterized in Venezuela and also a large number of African countries which are south of the Sahara Desert. Hyperinflation. That's what they don't want. The second thing is unemployment. Unemployment has been a much more serious problem since COVID because many people that were previously employed suddenly don't know where their income's coming from. Unemployment, as we've looked at in previous episodes, has its own social costs as well as economic costs, and the government needs to be able to deal with unemployment. So let's look at tools that the government can have if it actively intervenes. Remember that the traditional answer is that the government shouldn't intervene to improve unemployment, or it shouldn't intervene to be able to reduce inflation. You know why? Because as we had in previous episodes, we have the business cycle, boom, peak, recession, trough. If there's high inflation, that's because there's high unemployment. There's high level of employment. Right? And eventually it'll go down. It goes on the business cycle. Don't intervene, let the economy cure itself. There is still a lot of support for that view. But But governments cannot, often, they cannot wait in order to be able to change the policies. In order to let the government correct itself, my mistake. Because they're coming round for election, right, in a year or two, or even before, and if they don't show the results, the public will show its displeasure. Let us now consider the types of policies, and this and the next episode will look at the types of policies that the government might choose to use. Now, those go under two headings. Firstly, demand side policies, and the second one, supply side policies. Let's look at a typical case. Let us imagine that the country is suffering from unemployment, and it's a serious issue. Typically being faced now because of COVID. So we've got price level here, Y equals GDP here. Here's your, let's just call it the AS. Keep it to the AS at present. Alright, and there is keep it to the, we'll call it the SRAS. Easier. LRS, and let's say this is the state of the economy, and that's the AD. We are 1, Y1. This shows an economy which is in recession. The aim of the government is to improve the situation. Okay? So one of the things that the government can do, right, is simply to move the AD to the right. Encourage people to spend more money, encourage consumers to spend more money, encourage the government spends more money, and when you spend more money, any money that's spent by the producers, by consumers, by investors, by the government, or by foreigners who want your stuff, that's exports, right, means that the aggregate demand has moved to the right. And if it's not happening, that's not happening naturally, right, let the government intervene. How is the government going to move the aggregate demand to the right? Okay, I'll take this off the board, right, because you know what the problem is, and we will list what the policies are. One of the ways that it will actually move it to the right will be, number one, lowering the taxes. What happens if you lower tax? If you lower tax for consumers, that means that consumers have got more money. So we can put this one down, lowering taxes. And that is an example of, and I'll put it above, better if I raise it, it's an example of a fiscal policy. So I put the word fiscal policies, and one of them could be lowering taxes. Now, if people are paying, if less of people's money is being spent on in taxes, it means that for each person's got more money to spend. And if people have got more money to spend, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a bigger demand for goods and services. There is an alternative which I'm not going to write on the board because it will confuse, so I'm just going to make it orally. That is, Keynesian policies, however, Keynes and the Keynesian school, which we looked at in a previous class, say that it's actually a better idea to get the government to spend more money. You know why? Because the government's very good at creating jobs. And the sorts of people that the government creates jobs are people who are generally short of money. And when you're short of money, what's going to happen? You're going to be spending it. You're not going to have much of a chance of spending. And the aim is to spend, spend, spend. So according to the Keynesians, he's not so happy about lowering taxes. Because you know why? The consumers often tend to save their money. They don't want to encourage people to save their money. They're frightened they might save it. So you know what you do? You raise the taxes, the government takes the money, and the government improves the road. That employs many people. Improves government buildings. That employs many people. Builds more hospitals. That employs many people. Improves the schools, that employs many people. Improves the garbage collection, that also employs many people. And that moves the aggregate demand to the right. So this is controversial, right? How? Right, lowering taxes, right? The general philosophy is, right, the general outlook is that by a tax cut, it might stimulate the aggregate demand. Although, this is a beautiful thing about economics, we never know how the macroeconomic economy works. And there could be a case sometimes by a tax rise and a government spending program to improve the aggregate demand. Do you know why? Because the government knows better as to how to spend its money to be able to create jobs. This is a disputed point between the non-Keynesians, who would say lowering income taxes, which is for the consumer, and Keynesians, who are more likely to say, well, raise the taxes, or do whatever you can to encourage people to spend money, right? And the government creates lots of projects which are necessary for the public, and at the same time employ lots of people on relatively low wages, which means that they get any money that they get, they're going to spend. Well, that's even better. That's the multiplier effect. That is one type of policy. That's fiscal policies, lowering taxes. Now, another fiscal policy, which has only very recently been tried out because of COVID. What suddenly happened was that overnight you had mass unemployment. So the government says like this, we've got mass unemployment, and what's happening is that people aren't buying goods and services. So that's causing even more unemployment. The government has to stimulate the economy. Now, one fairly widespread policy here in Israel, they did it, Hong Kong's done it, and several other countries have done it, is that the government dishes out money to householders, dishes out money to businesses, right? Because what is happening is that by giving money out, people will spend the money, and that will create the jobs. And this is what the government wants. It's like giving a kickstart to the jobs. Instead of going around and giving money to all the various businesses, what they say is, we give money to all the various people, to the people. Right? They give a cash handout. In Israel, they gave 700, go back to the Netanyahu period, right? The government gave 750 shekels, which is approximately $200, spending money to every single person every single citizen over the age of 18, with the idea that they're going to go and spend the money, and that by increasing the aggregate demand, and that means that more people are able to stay at work. The businesses receive the money, and they buy more stocks. That was the argument. So lowering taxes, and I could also put now as a new one, before it appears in all the textbooks, is cash handouts. COVID. That's one type of policy. Another type of policy they can do, right? But remember what the problems are with lowering taxes. The problem with lowering taxes is if the government's got less money, it's not able to do that much. See what I mean? The problem with cash handouts is, well, it's okay if it works, but somebody somewhere along the line is going to pay for it, and it could be you, the taxpayer. So it means that the government might have taken money from one hand, and paid you back with the other hand. So therefore we need to come to another demand-side policy, which is its own stories, which are not fiscal policies which deal with tax, but monetary policies which deal with the amount of money that actually is in the national economy. Which means that if the money is just sitting in the national bank, or whatever it is, it's not doing much good. If the money is just sitting under the mattress, it's not doing much good. And monetary policy, right, the most important tool of monetary policy is the government's facility to be able to influence the interest rate. So I'm going to put this down. interest rates. Now, interest rates, right, is what is interest? It is the cost of the loan. And a quick introduction to how interest rates work. The government generally, in most countries, so it's not true here, it's not true worldwide, that the national bank, right, usually has got what's called the base rate of interest. That the banks will lend, let's say, 2% to the high street banks. Right? In this country, the Bank of Israel will lend to Bank Leumi, which is the national bank, at let's say 2%. So, in other words, the high street banks have to pay to be able to borrow from the national banks. Now, that sets the rate of interest. If the banks are going to lend you money, it'll be a lot more than 2%, because they've had to pay that 2% in order to be able to lend the money out. So it'll be typically 3% that they might lend you money out, that they might lend money. Because what they're doing is that they're making money on the 1%, the return, 1% per year, that they're actually going to be able to make the money. Now, if the governments, if that means that for you, for businesses, for consumers, we are all borrowing money, or rather most of us are, if we're part of the financial community. We borrow money to finance our houses, which is usually a good investment. We borrow money to finance cars, for example, which is, in my opinion, a questionable investment, because cars depreciate in value. Homes tend to appreciate in value. Parents borrow money to finance their children's education, which, as long as the right choices are made, is often a good investment. Right? I say a good reason to borrow money. Cross out the word investment. Now, what about businesses? Businesses borrow money far more than private people borrow money. Businesses borrow money, right, in order, firstly, to be able to pay for their land, to pay for their premises, and also to be able to pay for their labour, in order to pay for their capital. They have to borrow money because very few people can open businesses for small amounts of money. Right? We're talking about coming up with something like maybe $100,000, that's your money, right? And then borrowing the other $900,000 to make it $1 million before you even start thinking about opening your business. You see what I mean? So the banks don't mind, because as long as you're paying them an interest, right, you're good for business. They'll happily lend you more money. But you now get the idea that there is a cost. And one of the things that people are going to be asking before they borrow money is, how much is the interest rate? Now, according to the monetarists, the school, which tends to be anti-Keynesian, that doesn't hold the Keynesian principles. If you raise the interest rate, what's going to happen is people are going to stop borrowing money. And if people are going to stop borrowing money, what's going to happen is the aggregate demand will go up or down? Down. Conversely, if you lower the interest rate, more people will actually come along and borrow money, right? And there's going to be more spending. And therefore, the banks raising or lowering the interest rate, which is monetary policy, can have a great effect on whether people are spending money or whether people are not spending money. Or they spend more, or they spend less. That's called monetary policy. So to show this in a diagram, right, PL, Y equals GDP. Okay, let's say that the economy is over here, as it is in COVID, right, AD. We want to get the economy to here. Reduce the interest rate. That means that people are able to set up businesses which employ people more cheaply, and they're able to borrow money more cheaply. Okay, the demand for housing might go up because people are able to suddenly afford mortgages because the interest rates are much lower. Sounds all very nice when you first hear it, like fiscal policy, but they all come with their downsides. The downside of monetary policy, and we're going to end the presentation at this point, right, next time going on to supply side policies, right, is that there is a debate amongst economists. According to the monetarist school, if you raise the interest rate, people will have less money, will borrow less money. If you lower the interest rate, people will borrow more money because they believe that money is elastic in demand. I won't say price elastic in demand, but interest elastic in demand. In other words, raising or lowering the interest rates makes a difference. According to the Keynesians, they don't buy into it. They tend towards the view that it's not going to work. The multiplier rule, the idea of money multiplies, works. Because you know what? If you put the interest rate up, people will still borrow money. If you need to borrow money, you'll borrow whatever the interest rate is. It's borrow now, questions afterwards. You see, it's not going to have a big influence, and therefore, money is interest inelastic. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we've now looked at one side of government policies in improving the national economy. We have looked at demand-side policies, which involve moving the AD to the right from AD1 to AD2. There are different methods: lowering taxes, cash handouts, which are fiscal policies, because that means how it's connected with tax, with government income and government spending. And anything to do with taxes or payouts from taxes are fiscal. They have their pluses and minuses. By the way, why doesn't the multiplier policy work? Because, which is that if you pump money into the public bodies, right, people are going to spend money. Well, a lot of research has been done and found that it doesn't always work. The idea that people who receive money always spend the money that they receive. Monetary policies, right, which involve changing the interest rates, but also have a problem, which is that there's a debate, and it's not always necessarily true, that whether a change in the interest rate is going to have any effect on the national economy, because there's always the argument and the possibility that people will either borrow money or not borrow money for reasons that are totally disconnected with the interest rate. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, this finishes this episode, and next episode we will pick it up and look at not at ways that the government can move the aggregate demand curve, but at ways that it can actually move the aggregate supply curve. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.